reactor. In each case, the emergency systems worked, but the water failed to fill the core. Often it was forced out under pressure. Despite this, both the industry and senior members of the AEC argued that the full-size safety systems were safe enough.
I think what happened was the federal government and the nuclear industry decided that the absence of proof of danger was almost as good as proof of safety. In other words, even though we had done experiments that cast doubt on whether the safety systems would actually work if we had an accident, we still had that backup that, well, maybe an accident won't happen while we continue to work to perfect the design of the emergency system. Now, we couldn't announce to the public that we, having told the public that the plants were safe, we now had to disclose to them we were wrong, and then the fact that all these safety systems we told you about, actually, they might not do any good. My goodness, the uproar would have been, we all probably would have been fired. That would have been the end of this wonderful technology from the standpoint of us. And we just couldn't admit that we had been wrong. And plus, of course, you understand with this one experiment, it didn't prove that the emergency systems wouldn't work in all circumstances.
What is your principal concern right at this minute?
Well, my principal concern is that we got an accident that we never been designed to accommodate.
On March the 28th, 1979, a series of human and mechanical errors at the 3 Mile Island plant exposed the core. It reacted with steam and produced hydrogen, which exploded. None of the emergency teams could understand what was going on inside the reactor. Then suddenly, this helicopter detected a large radioactive cloud drifting towards the nearest town. The voices of the commissioners in charge of the disaster were recorded by a dictaphone that had been left running on a table.
What was your time scale involved there?
Hours.
Hours before what?
Before you had a core melt.
Before you had a core melt?
You would have hours till when you were generating fission products in a core melt kind of situation through the containment. I think, we got the best we got, Joe. And they're not coming up with answers. We got the... Well, don't you think as a precautionary measure there should be some evacuation?
Probably, but I must say it's operating totally in the blind, and I don't have any confidence at all that if we order evacuation, we won't move people from a place where they've already gotten a piece of the dose they're going to get into an area where they will get
another piece.
They will have had 0.5 of what they were going to get, and now they'll move someplace else and get 1.0. Good. Now, Joe?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me I've got to call the governor.
Yes, sir. I do. I think you've got to talk to him immediately.
Do it immediately. We're operating almost totally in the blind. His information is ambiguous. Mine is non-existent. I don't know, a couple of blind men now have to stagger around and make a decision here.
Don't we know that it's been stopped?
We just lost all communication with the control room.
For 4 days, the engineers at the plant watched helplessly as a bubble of hydrogen grew inside the damaged reactor. What they feared most was a further massive explosion. But they knew that if they tried to force the bubble out of the reactor, it might move downwards and completely uncover the core. They would then face the nightmare of a meltdown. The engineers were trapped by the consequences of an accident no one could have anticipated. It was a point they made to the commissioners again and again during the incident.
It's a failure mode that's never been studied. It's unbelievable.
Well, the thing that impressed me was how little we really knew about the situation. It was very hard to figure out what was happening. There was a lot of confusion on everyone's part, both on the company's part and the government's part, and a lot of other people who were participating. And I think this had a very strong effect on the public. Basically, to see all the men in the white suits or white lab coats who were supposed to know on TV, basically scratching their heads, made a lot of people wonder whether things were as much under control as they had been told.
3 Mile Island. The President's Commission estimated the cost of the accident could reach $1.8 billion. That's a lot of money to pay for a power plant that may never work again. But 3 Mile Island wasn't the first nuclear accident, and it won't be the last. In 1979 alone, there were 20 nuclear incidents that could have led to the catastrophic meltdown of an American nuclear power plant. Don't get sold on nuclear power. We can't pay the price.
Their energy policy will benefit the nuclear industry and the oil companies, and they have given only lip service to the solar industry.
There were protests against nuclear power throughout the world. In the public's imagination, it was transformed from something good to something bad. Much of the anger was turned on the nuclear scientists. It emerged that they had deliberately concealed many of the risks and uncertainties they had discovered at the very time when they were publicly promoting the wonders of nuclear power.
We would, in effect, have solved the energy problem forever, permanently, which in itself is just an extraordinary new dimension in human experience, to have energy which is the ultimate raw material.
We recognized that there was a risk, but we always deemed the risk to be really acceptable. But now I guess I'm more mature, older. I realize that the decision of what is acceptable is not something that we technologists can make. It's something that the public makes.
Why did you think it was something you could make then?
You know, I guess it never occurred to me to ask this question. The nuclear enterprise had always been, well, it started out as a secret enterprise, of course, and the notion of the public being intimately involved in very complicated technical issues which went way beyond the competence of any member of the public, it just didn't seem that that was the right way to do it. And I think the basic question is, can modern intrusive technology and liberal democracy coexist?
The power rises sharply. The rated power level is exceeded.
I keep in my safe records of the operator's telephone conversations on the eve of the accident. It makes one's skin crawl to read them. One operator telephones another and asks, "The program here states what must be done, but a lot has been crossed out." The other thinks for a moment and then says, "Act according to what has been crossed out." In Kiev, we set off for the nuclear power station. It didn't enter my head that we were moving towards an event on a planetary scale. On the following day, when I went into the ruins of the reactor in an armored troop carrier, I had that sense of anger, that there were no solutions, no technical remedies worked out in advance. Of course, we had said such an accident could only happen once in 1,000 years. But who said that this once would fall in our year 1986?
Это голос Валерия Легасова, академика, одного из моих героев моей повести «Чернобыль», человека необыкновенной и трагической судьбы, человека, с которым я встретился осенью 1986 года.
Legasov had been one of the main architects of Russia's nuclear program. Now he led the fight at Chernobyl, repeatedly flying through the radiation above the blazing reactor. As with 3 Mile Island, an improbable sequence of errors had led to an explosion and a molten core that had now started to burn its way through the foundations of the reactor. A tunnel was frantically dug directly under the plant by hundreds of volunteers. Liquid nitrogen was poured in to freeze the ground underneath. By luck, the nitrogen gas also began to stifle the graphite fire. And then on the 5th day, for reasons that still no one understands, the core began to cool. Despite this, throughout the disaster and the terrible dangers, Legasov remained a staunch defender of nuclear power.
The maximum dose was 0.7 roentgens per hour. Over the reactor, we got between 0.3 and 0.5 roentgens.
максимально 0,7 рентгена.